Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bow Valley Nonprofit Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us today. Again, if you're just coming in now, please introduce yourself in the chat box at the bottom of the screen, including your name and the nonprofit you're associated with. And before we get started, I'd just like to say that this webinar is being hosted in the Bow Valley. It's located on the lands of the Treaty 7 territory, and we acknowledge the past, present, and future generations of the Stoney Nakoda, Blackfoot, Tsuut'ina nations who have helped steward this land, as well as honor and celebrate this place. Before we get started, I'd like to share a few housekeeping tips. If during today's webinar you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the webinar comment box. There will be 5 polls during the webinar. Know that your responses will be anonymous. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end of Kathy's presentation, so make sure you stick around for that. And at the very end of the webinar, there'll be a short survey. Please fill this in as it really helps to inform future sessions. This webinar is being recorded and will be available at the Bow Valley Nonprofits website under training. And finally, if you're looking for ways to connect, please look at the discussion forum on the Bow Valley Nonprofits website, as well as our new Facebook page. Last, but certainly not least, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Tara and Ruth at the towns of Canmore and Banff FCSS for making this speaker series possible. Joining us today is Kathy Arney, founder of KEA Canada, who is going to explore ways to improve your fundraising strategy by combining tactics and strategies to support a healthy, strong, and impactful future. Kathy has spent her career growing organizational capacity and improving results. She's passionate about enabling people to reach their full potential. She's an expert in fund development, capacity building, campaigns, strategy, and operations. And her business and executive background, together with 2 decades of working in philanthropy, combined to provide a unique skill set for clients. Founding KEA Canada in 2013, Kathy provides services in a variety of areas, including resource development, developing organizational capacity, strategic planning, board development, campaign planning and management, coaching, and interim leadership. My name's Moselle Dibden, and I'll be moderating the questions today. Now let's welcome Kathy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's really a pleasure for me to have an opportunity to share some thoughts that I have with you on fundraising strategy. And nice to see such a variety of people who have signed up. Welcome. I'm going to be doing a lot of talking for about the first 45 minutes, but please do, if you have any thoughts or comments, please add them to the chat, or Moselle is monitoring the Q&A as well. We will have time to answer questions near the end of the session, but I will do my best to keep an eye on the chat as well in case there's something that comes up during my kind of prepared talk for the session. I do want to say that I'm coming to you from Canmore on Treaty 7 territory and home of Métis Nation 3. And so I hope you really enjoy this. I'll see if I can move this forward. So maybe I'll start with a little story about why I do what I do. So I'm actually an accountant by training. Like many people my age, I ended up working in the sector by mistake and just a happy happenstance. And I happily worked on the finance and administration side of the house for quite a few years. But then something happened. I went to an opening of a building and the main donor stood up and talked about why he made this lead gift. He'd gone to school there, met his wife there, started a business, and was incredibly successful. He had 2 children and they grew up, and the first went off to that same university, and in the second year was tragically killed in a ski accident. His second child went to that same university and in second year was tragically killed in a car accident. A few years later, he lost his wife to cancer. And he stood in front of the group and told us how grateful he was that the university had given him the opportunity to honor his family and their memory through the gift. And this was one of the most meaningful things that he had ever done in his life. Well, there wasn't a dry eye in the building. I still get goosebumps. And I thought, I want to be part of that story. I want to be part of helping donors to do something that not only helps the work of charities, but that touches them so very deeply and makes them feel that it's one of the most important things they do in their life. And I can't tell you how many times I've been thanked for giving donors the opportunity to make a difference that matters so much to them. Thus started my 20 plus years, I won't say exactly how many, in the sector, the last 8 supporting philanthropy and charities through KEA Canada. And as it turns out, I'm one of the very few fundraising professionals who has a background in operations. My business and accounting backgrounds provide a unique perspective on the importance of finance and fundraising working well together. But we'll get to that a little later in the presentation. So Moselle asked me to position this talk as an intermediate conversation. As promised, we're going to focus on strategies to grow your fundraising success, tips to include overhead in fundraising, improving your return on investment, relationship building for long-term fundraising success, and 5 easy steps to improve your gift planning. I'm going to follow a little bit of the format of 10 lessons learned from the trenches. Of course, whole degrees are now built on fundraising, but we'll try and stick to some highlights today that can hopefully help you. We're going to also have 5 polls during the session to get you your thinking juices going. Please answer the polls. They are anonymous. They'll only be aggregated. And again, please feel free to use the chat function here. So one caveat I always want to say at the beginning is fund development is an art and a science. I'm going to share a lot about best practices, rules of thumb, proven techniques, but please don't ever lose sight of your tuition and the opportunity to adapt and respond to where donors are and meeting them where they are. For example, I've made a successful multi-million-dollar ask over the phone when that is generally considered what you absolutely don't do. You always do it in person. That was pre-Zoom days when we were all on Zoom. It was actually a phone call. There's a rule of thumb that you have 3 meetings with a major donor before asking, but sometimes you need to respond to the donor who's ready in the first meeting. So always make sure you're prepared, but also know it's okay to say, we're not ready yet. We'd like to do some more work with you, or we'd like to put some more information together for you. Thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed my first story. I'm just looking at the chat there. So I also want to share with you definitions that I certainly work with, just to give us all context. So philanthropy is the motivating value. Development is the management of a systematic and strategic program. Fundraising is the action. And I also want to just remember that everyone has a role in your organization: ambassadors, enthusiastic communicators, connectors, cultivators, solicitors, or askers. So philanthropy is definitely a team sport. Okay, so I'm going to get you to do 2 polls. So Moselle, if you could please put up the first poll. And the question is, has your organization ever received a gift that blew your mind? So Moselle, I can't see how many people have answered, so maybe you can pull it off when we've got answers there and share it. Okay, are we able to share? Okay, look at that. 62% said yes, they have received a gift that blew their mind. That's fantastic. So, and no, and a quarter of you said you don't know. So that's important too, as we think about your entire organization's being involved in fundraising in order to maximize your success. So that's great. Thank you. And the second question then is, what is the biggest gift you have ever received? Now, I mean your organization. Okay, so while you're answering that, there's a question, why are we using the term gift as opposed to grant or fund? What is the difference? So that's a great question. So when I talk about a gift, that's from my perspective, that is could include a grant, and it could include a private sector donation. So a gift generally means it's not a fee for service, it's money that's been given or granted to you to support your mission. It could be restricted or it could be unrestricted. We're going to do, last session focused an awful lot on grants. My colleague Emily Bocking did an excellent session on applying for grants. I'm going to focus more today on private sector giving, so corporations, individuals who are donating to charities, and what you can do to improve that side of your plan. So I can see that we've gotten a few, 20% of you have received over $100,000, 10% over $1 million, 30% 1,000, and 30% over 10,000. So that's a really great mix. So, and don't know, there could be some reasons for that, right? But an interesting question to ask your organizations. It'll give you a sense of where you're focused in terms of size of giving and fundraising in your organization. So thanks for responding to that. Hang on, I'm just a little confused. So we're going to do poll 3 of 5. If someone offered you $1 million and asked what you plan to spend it on, what would you do? Would you faint? That's way too much money to wrap my head around. Would you not have the faintest idea what to do with it? Would you probably pay down some debt and endow the rest so that you have some guaranteed annual revenue? Or would you talk about the big dreams for your organization and explain how this would enable them? Okay, what have we got? Okay, good. We've got 3/4 of you talking about big dreams and 25% talking about paying down debt, which can be important depending on where you are. I'm glad that no one's going to faint and that you all have some idea about what you're going to do with it. So, you know, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different organizations and talk about big dreams. So the point number 1 that we're going to make today out of our list of top 10 learnings is have a big idea. I remember I was working for an institution and we were talking about what they wanted to include in a campaign. And so I went to the dentistry program and said, well, what would you like to raise money for as part of the campaign? And he said, well, I really could use some new dental chairs. They really make a difference in terms of training students how to treat patients and the comfort of the patients. Great, that's great. But then I asked him, if a donor wanted to give you $10 million, what would you do with it? Well, all of a sudden, he started to talk about the fact that there are rural and remote communities and First Nations communities who didn't have access to dental care. And imagine if he could get a mobile dental office that he could take to remote and rural communities with students and be able to deliver critical needed dental programs and services to these communities. All of a sudden, he went from a scarcity mindset of just working with what you have and just incrementally increase to this crazy big idea about transforming what they would be able to do, not only for their students, but for the communities. And that can be the power of thinking about a big gift. Okay, number 4. Stewarding your top donors. So this is the poll for, do you know who your top 10 supporters are? So yes, I think about them almost every day. Sort of, I can name a few of them. Or no, we treat everybody the same. And the drum roll, please. Okay, good, good. So keep this in mind as we think further. One of the things that this responds to, thank you for this, Moselle, is the culture of philanthropy in your organization. So number 2 is nurture a culture of philanthropy. I've heard several times from organizations or clients or potential clients, we really want to hire a fundraiser, and then we don't have to worry about fundraising. They can do it. And that is a recipe for disaster. Fundraising has to be ingrained in your organization, and it has to be part of everything you do. From people working at the front desk who know who big donors are. And it's not so that you can treat them totally differently than anybody else, or that you don't treat other people well. It's so that you can help them feel like the important part of the organization they are. So a true culture of philanthropy exists when everyone involved in the organization is committed to its mission, its values, and its case for support, and recognize that they have a role in ensuring successful fundraising. That is probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give to any organization, is to help bring your entire organization into fundraising. And if you think about fundraising as opportunity and providing opportunity, it really becomes a question of having the whole organization provide opportunity for people who believe in what you do and are interested in supporting it. Lesson number 3 is investing in relationships. So we all know that you don't ask someone to marry them on your first date. You start and you have to start from the beginning, and they take time. So dating world, if you're doing blind dates, we call that cold calls. Developing new relationships and nurturing relationships is really critical to long-term relationship building, which is a really important core activity that you do as an organization in terms of nurturing long-term philanthropy. During COVID, those with genuine relationships sought increased donations. Not everybody, but a lot of the people I spoke to. Those who reached out just to check on their donors and see how they were doing continued to strengthen relationships, even if their donors couldn't make gifts at that time. It wasn't an ask, it was about people who care about each other and what we do. And donations followed. We work with the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra, and during COVID, they vowed to find a way to continue their programming. It wasn't easy. They converted to online. They kept in touch with their donors. When they reached out, when concert series and concerts were closed, as we all started to close down, unanimously their audiences converted those tickets into gifts. And what they discovered from their relationship with their donors was that they were not just providing entertainment or concerts, they were providing hope to their audience. During this online year, they expanded their audience out of Saskatoon, out of the country, internationally. Numbers were up, and they had a very successful year. Relationships were strengthened. They built new relationships, and their donors and their donations increased significantly. So this was the big thing for me here, is relationships go both ways. If you care about your donors as much as they care about you, that's really going to strengthen your relationships and ultimately your fundraising opportunities. Number 4 is have a plan. So here is the top 10 checklist that I often refer to in growing your fund development program. And here we talk about have and know your vision and mission, be able to articulate your big picture goals for the next 3 to 5 years, identify a fundraising menu within your plans, write your fundraising case, tying your needs to your goals, know your elevator pitch, establish an ongoing donor stewardship and recognition program, set meaningful, measurable goals, ensure fundraising policies, procedures, and systems are in place, nurture a culture of philanthropy, and have willingness, confidence, and ability to participate in donor meetings. Now, we're not going to address each one of these things here today. We'll address several of them, but I wanted you to have this checklist for your reference. So when we talk about fund development program or plan, one of the first things that I talk to charities about is a gift chart. Now, many of you may already be using a gift chart, and sometimes you do them for a particular project or a particular initiative or a major campaign, or sometimes just for your annual fundraising goals. So you can see that, generally speaking, in this example, I used $1 million. You can take some zeros away or add some zeros. The concept is always the same. And that is the top roughly 20% of your donations should be worth 80% of your revenue. And the reason that you do this is it takes the same amount of time, generally speaking, to ask for $1,000 as it does to ask for $10,000 or $100,000. Once you have your process and your system in place, is finding the right people and asking for the right amount depending on where they are. So you want to have large enough donations to be able to move your program forward and be able to raise money in a way that's sustainable and maximizes your return on investment. Of course, not everybody can give at that level. So, and every gift is important, but it's important to have revenue targets at different levels so that you can understand how the numbers work and how you're going to get there. So you can see here that it's how many donations. It takes $21,000 gifts to only raise the top 2% of your goal here, and one gift is $250,000. What the other number that we pay attention to is there needs to be 4 potential donors for each level of gift in order to achieve one gift at that level. So you can see for one gift in this example of $250,000, you need 4 people identified, people or organizations or grantors, any of those, to be able to raise that money. And then as you go down in size of gift, the number of gifts you can get generally increases. So, and that in large part is because you've got a larger number of people who have the capacity to give at that level. So that's an important tool. And by the way, we're sending out an Excel, some Excel templates to you at the end of this presentation that have that include this gift chart. Once you've got your gift chart sorted, the depth chart is your next step. So you remember that we said one gift of $250,000 equals 4 prospects. So then you've got a list here underneath each giving level where you fill in who you think in your organization, among your donors or people who are connected with your charity, who you think may have the interest and the ability to give at those levels. And when you can't fill in the blanks, that's where you need to do research and ask people for advice to figure out how you fill in those blanks. And then, of course, once you've filled them in, then you have to develop a plan to engage them in your work and ask them for their gift. Well, and then the last tool, all 3 of these tools are included in the Excel spreadsheet with links in the document that Moselle will send out after this session. The last piece is a recognition chart. Now, I know at least one of you said you want to make sure that you treat people equally, and I totally respect that. And there are different organizations that may have a real culture for treating everybody equally. What that does, though, is it keeps you at the lowest common denominator, because as you increase the amount of recognition, it also increases the amount of work and the amount of time and potentially the amount of money required to be able to make that ask. So if you are, for example, building a new building or a new room, I guess one basic option would be to do, say, a plaque in the room that lists everybody who gave any amount of money to that room. The other option, which is more common, would be to identify what the largest gift you need is, and that perhaps then that room might be named in honor of the person who gave you the most amount of money. So there are different approaches to that. There are also different ways to say thank you. The best practice in the industry is for every gift you get, you should be thanking them 7 times. So that could be they're listed in an annual report, they could receive an email, they get a thank you note with their charitable tax receipt. That's already 3. So important to keep that number in mind. It does make a difference. So the next learning or lesson is number 5, which is measuring the right things. Meeting your revenue needs is important each year, but in order to build a sustainable revenue and capacity, other metrics are also really important to think about. So, what is the number of donors you have? What is the average gift size in your organization, and what are you projecting you'd like to grow everything by every year? So obviously, if you grow the number of donors, but decrease your average gift size, that's going to be more difficult to get where you want to be. You want to be growing the number of donors and growing your average gift size. You also want to be acquiring new donors. So that's often, if you have a fundraising team, that's often something that fundraisers have a hard time with, is cold calling or going and meeting people for the first time. It happens to be something I love doing because you really get the opportunity to know new people and find out what interests them and what their goals are. But you're always going to lose people over time. Hopefully you don't lose too many, but you have to keep adding new ones so that as you lose them, the number of donors continues to maintain and increase over time. So that's what we refer to by the donor retention rate, is how many are you keeping every year. The other thing that's important is meaningful meetings. So if someone's really focused, if you have someone on your team who's a full-time fundraiser, we often talk about 3 to 5 face-to-face, or not these days, but meaningful meetings with donors per year. And a meaningful meeting tends to be one that advances the relationships or advances the conversation towards providing an opportunity for them to support your organization. Knowing your fundraising return on investment is important. That speaks to the overhead involved in fundraising. My actual approach to all of that is you should have a minimum cost to raise $1 and a maximum. It's important to be able to invest so that you're able to nurture relationship and provide the organizational capacity to continue to support donors and to support your organization effectively. Operating funds as a percentage of revenue, it's a different way of looking at it. The number of grant applications submitted. So if you're, it's important to take a look at how many were submitted against how many you received. I would say 1 to 3. So you're successful in 1 grant for every 3 applications. That's a benchmark. If you're not doing as well as that, then maybe you need to take a look at your process, what you're asking for, what the quality of your grant applications are like. And if you're doing better than that, then congratulations. New revenue secured and of course, cash received in the current year. There are other planning tools, activity calendars, donor reporting, events, annual giving asks, seasonal greetings or a seasonal ask, and including opportunities to support in all communications. And one of the things I like to say to organizations is there should be something fundraising related in every single communication you put out, whether it's a donate button, whether it's thanking someone for a gift, or whether it's identifying an opportunity for support. It becomes that culture of philanthropy if it just becomes part of what you're always talking about. Number 6 is know your donor's motivation. So when I was working at the University of Saskatchewan, we were raising money for a new livestock and forage center of excellence. Excuse me. And we were trying to identify who might be interested in supporting this important new initiative. And we identified A&W and began conversations with them. At the time, A&W was at odds with the beef industry. Their marketing campaign was not sitting well with the beef industry. And so they were having a lot of relationship issues in that organization. And at the same time, we knew they had a need to build relationships. We also knew that they were doing really well. So we began nurturing an existing relationship with A&W and secured a $5 million gift as a team for the Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence. This gift was extraordinary for A&W. It was outside of their normal philanthropic plans and strategies, but they also saw that by contributing to this Livestock and Forage Center, that it was not only going to be an excellent investment for research purposes, but that in fact it would have the intended value of building relationships and demonstrating their engagement and support for the Canadian beef industry. So remembering why donors give, there are a number of reasons why they give. Making a difference, giving back. There's something here called to thwart others. I wouldn't necessarily use those terms. I might say that they want to demonstrate their commitment versus others in their market space. So they might want to be in the top sponsorship level as a bank for a particular event, for example. Demonstrating generosity, creating future philanthropists, those are all important reasons why people give. But ultimately, donors give because they're asked. So the reality is that if we don't ask, you don't get the funds. So building those skills and whether you call it an ask or providing an opportunity, it's absolutely critical. The other thing to really pay attention to, this is an old survey, it's 2013 numbers, but I believe that the general information is still valid and still consistent. The number one reason people give is compassion towards those in need. And you'll see the last reason people give is a tax credit. Now, what's important to know here is often the tax credit can impact the size of gifts someone is able to make. And it is an important part of making the gift, but it's not the reason people make the gift. So compassion towards those in need, personal belief in the cause, contribution to the economy, they're personally affected, being asked by a friend or family, so supporting an organization that your friend or family believes in. Religious obligations are all high priority. It's also interesting to notice on the tax credit at the bottom two, that it's the 75-year-olds and older who are typically more concerned or interested in the tax credit aspect, and by and large are focused on estate planning and gift planning more so than the younger ages. So what donors want? The big message here is do what you said you'd do. Build trust, provide updates, know how their contributions will be used and are being used. They want to know who's managing the organization and the funds so that they can trust them and look them in the eye very often. If someone wants something kept confidential to maintain that confidentiality. I once accepted a donation to a university and the donor said, my wife doesn't agree with this donation. And if she finds out if you breach confidentiality, I will sue you. So confidentiality can be incredibly important. And of course, they want appropriate recognition, whether that's remaining anonymous or honoring their support in a way that makes sense for them. Number 7, adopting a long-term perspective. So something that people don't often do when they're talking to donors or supporters is to ask them for 3-year commitments instead of 1. It is the same amount of work to ask people if they would consider supporting your organization for 3 years as it is to ask for their support for 1 year. And if you get those 3-year commitment, that starts to give you some predictability in your revenue stream. It helps the donor know what their commitments are. And especially if you get them onto monthly giving, where it's automatically taken off their credit card or out of their bank account. And after a while, it just becomes part of their expenses and they don't necessarily notice. And that becomes a really important revenue stream for you as a charity. The other thing about long-term is the rule of thumb for asking for major gifts is that it takes 12 to 18 months to secure the gift, that there's 3 meetings until you get there, and that probably 1 in 3 asks produce the desired outcome. So many of those things take longer than 1 year. So if you're so focused on achieving a revenue target for this year, there's a couple things that will happen. You're asking people to potentially make commitments before they're ready. The other thing that can happen is you leave money on the table. So if you're talking to somebody and engaging them in your work, then and you ask them too early before they have an opportunity to learn more and think about it and get inspired, you might get $100. But if you wait a little while and engage them and maybe invite them to a tour or to see what it is you're doing, they might commit to $1,000, or they might commit to a multi-year pledge. So it really does make a difference to build and nurture your relationship and think long-term. So number 8. This has been an area that I've really been focused on lately, and that is the importance of infrastructure and inspiration. While finance and fundraising often speak different languages and are measured based on different goals, they're both critical to success of charities, and so is the donor. While we maximize the overall impact, we will maximize the overall impact of our organization and the funds raised to do so if we can find the sweet spot in the middle, connecting finance, fundraising, and donors through infrastructure and inspiration. So how can finance impact fundraising goals to help overcome overhead challenges and empower fundraisers to secure the kind of money that doesn't erode our capacity for sustainable impact? We're going to talk about that a little bit. Several of you are in smaller organizations, but some of you in larger organizations may have heard that people on the bookkeeping or the accounting or finance side might say, well, geez, the more money we raise, the broker we get as an organization, because we've accepted money to do something, but we don't have enough money to be able to pay for all of the things around it that you need to have to happen. So a big part of the conversation and the way I see things having to move is to think about the big picture and structure your fundraising goals and priorities around it. We're recently working with an incredible charity that supports inner city populations, and they were stuck. They were struggling to raise money. When we asked what their goal was, it was a very responsible risk management strategy to pay down their debt, but donors were not interested. So we asked the organization why they wanted to approach that, and they weren't struggling to cover their debt payments. Core funds were covering that, but they were focused on what they might do once the debt was paid down in order to help their clients. So when we started talking about what they wanted to do when the debt was gone, their eyes lit up. They wanted to expand cultural programming, increase outreach, collaborate with partner organizations to improve service. Wow, we all felt those inspirational goals. So what would happen if they continued to pay down their debt with core funds and worked with fundraisers and donors to secure funds to expand their services now, improve their outreach now, and help more people? Then they would inspire philanthropy through sharing stories and increasing their impact. It's still a responsible financial strategy, but with a higher impact and much more inspiration about what it is they're doing and how donors could help. So they're working to continue to pay down debt gradually through core funds and be more effective at raising money through their inspirational stories and activities that will benefit their clients faster and more effectively. Number 9, think full cost. Many of you may have seen this, this bench on your walk on the benchlands. It says, "In loving memory of Lorna, a wonderful mom, grandmother, and friend." Commemorating a loved one like Lorna not only is a wonderful tribute, but it can help provide a service to the community. A place to sit, contemplate, enjoy the surroundings. If you shop around, you can commemorate a bench for hundreds or thousands of dollars. If the price point is too low, the bench will cost us money, cost you as the organization money, and donors will ultimately be unhappy. What we don't want to happen is that the beautiful bench turns into this. Working together and full costing the bench, we can ensure that the bench is maintained and enjoyed for many years and continues to properly honor Lorna's life. So when thinking about full costing the bench, we look, of course, at the cost to purchase it. But what about the staff cost to prepare the site? The staff cost to install the bench, the creation of the plaque, and creation of a maintenance reserve or endowment that can help maintain it for years to come. The fact that your staff costs may already be funded is not important here. It is still a cost of the project, and is a perfect example that by including this overhead cost in the project, will save core staffing funds to redeploy to other areas. It's win-win-win for finance, fundraisers, and donors. Okay, on to our 5th and final poll, planned giving. So what is your approach to planned giving or gift planning? Avoid. I can't talk about dying with donors. It's a wonderful surprise when we receive a check. Our donors are aware that we welcome planned gifts, but we don't ask. Or we have a program that recognizes donors who tell us that we are in their will. We want to thank them while they're still around. Okay, let's wrap that up, please. Thanks, Mazel. Okay, so this is a good mix as well, and I get it. I was certainly at the beginning of my career, I was really uncomfortable about talking to donors, and then I learned, and I really got to embrace it. So the next lesson, number 9, is to embrace gift planning. See, my time is going quickly, so I'm going to go a little bit faster. So there are 5 gift planning tips that I would give you right now that are simple and easy and you can do. Number 1 is clearly include planned giving information on your website. Number 2, provide draft will language and know how to accept securities. Number 3, include contact information of a real person on your website, not a general info or a voicemail automated phone number. And 4, develop a legacy recognition program. 5, talk about planned giving in your communication and verbally. Think about gift planning. There are 2 main parts of gift planning. Those terms often get used interchangeably, but the 2 most common types of gift planning are remembering a charity in your will, and the second is making a gift through publicly traded securities. So advising people that you are willing and interested and helpful in receiving both kinds of donations will put you in a much stronger position than really most of the charities in the country, because so many are not doing this. So providing opportunity, we talked about that at the beginning. During giving conversations, asking, how do you want to be remembered? Getting in touch with people's feelings about what their goals are, their legacy goals are. And have you considered remembering our charity in your will? That was the one line, the first line I learned when I was talking to people about gift planning. Have you considered remembering our charity in your will? And it's and once you I practiced and practiced and practiced saying that, and it's a beautiful question. And once I got comfortable with asking it, what I discovered was people were quite comfortable with answering it. The second is including in your giving forms check boxes. I would like more information about leaving this organization in my will. Or I would like more information about making this gift through publicly traded securities. If you ask people and they check the box and tell you they want to know, that makes the conversation even easier because they have requested that you speak to them about it. And you'd be surprised how many people respond and that they are interested. I've included the website in the resources. There's a website called NextAfter that has done an awful lot of research and experiments understanding what kinds of asking and online giving produces better results. So one example is here, if you use all fancy texts and logos at the top versus quite a plain letter, you get 29% more donations with a plain letter. That actually shocked me. Similarly, what we learned here was that if you do not give a donation amount option box, you just ask them to fill in the blank, there was 125% lift in conversion from your donations. So I encourage you to go and look at the NextAfter website if you're looking at producing some online tools. So that is all 10 lessons learned. I hope you found something useful in them. I have also included some resources that I wanted to share with you. CAGP Willpower Initiative. I know some of you already know about, and this is from CAGP and the incredible Paul Nazareth, who's a real giant in this field, are really pushing across the country, and it's a wonderful campaign to just help Canadians understand about the power of giving bequests in their will and what that can do for our charities. Imagine Canada has fantastic resources. This one is about key performance indicators. There's a recently released gift planning for small shops YouTube that Paul Nazareth does again. That's fantastic. And Vitreo, which is a really excellent firm in Calgary, does a number of podcasts and a series that I think you can learn a lot from. So that wraps up our session for today. I hope that you got some use out of it, and I would really be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks so much, Kathy. That was fantastic presentation, packed full of really useful information. I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat here, but I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about how nonprofits can get their board more involved with fundraising.
It's a great question. Thank you. One of the things that I have learned in my time working with a number of nonprofit boards is they all know they should be more involved in fundraising, and their organizations should be more involved in fundraising. But I'm just going to stop my share here. They also generally are nervous about it. They could be really uncomfortable with asking for money. They could really be uncomfortable with just the whole prospect of it. So when I work with boards, what I often do is do some training and have them go through practice of asking each other, just so they understand what it feels like to be asked and what it feels like to ask. But understanding that they won't really have to ask if they don't want to. And then the other thing I do is often suggest that they get involved early on in thanking people. And that can be either handwriting cards or having a meeting with someone who's supported the organization just to say thank you and just to find out why they supported their organizations. And that works really well because it's really hard to have a bad meeting when you're thanking people, and it really helps to get them engaged in fund development activities.
Great, that's fantastic. Thanks so much. A question here from someone who works with many informal nonprofit groups or community groups who don't qualify as donees, or maybe that's donors. This is a barrier to some of them receiving funds. What advice do you have for them to leverage private gifts?
Oh, that's a great question. I know that I'm a member of Rotary here and worked with the Rotary Foundation. And I know one of the things that happened there was Rotary raised money during the floods back in, was that 20? I always forget the year. But one of the things that you can do is, if you're looking for support or ways to receive money that can be receipted, you find an organization where your work is part of their mandate. And so you can partner with a charity that does have a charitable registration number and work with them to be able to deliver your services through partnering in that way.
Fantastic. And I see someone added in the chat there that the Banff Canmore Community Foundation is great for that.
Yes, and that depends. The Banff Canmore Community Foundation is a tremendous resource in the Valley, can be a wonderful way to receive funds. The thing that you have to work with them on, though, is whether they are able to transfer the funds to you in some way or have you do the work. It has to be part of their mandate. Banff Canmore Community Foundation is a huge resource for things like if you want to set up an endowment for your charity, they are experts at that, or you want to partner in that way. So before starting a new charity or starting an initiative, I would always talk to someone like the Banff Canmore Community Foundation.
Fantastic. That's super helpful. Thanks, Kathy. Got a question here. Are you aware of many legacy gifting programs in the Bow Valley?
Well, there are several, if you mean charities that have legacy programs. I know there are several in the Valley, and I think there can be a lot more. But the thing about a legacy program is it's really interesting when you start to do the research. For example, most people who are wanting to put a bequest in their will often are in a rush. They're just about to go on a trip and they realize their will's out of date and they have to hurry. And then they go, well, I really like the, charity X. So their lawyer quickly looks up charity and it's a Sunday and they can't reach anybody, or there's no name and there's no will language. So they end up putting it, not putting it in their will, or going to a different charity who has the information already there. The other interesting thing is, even at the level of funeral homes have a list of charities for people to help jog their mind when they're in a very, that's a difficult place. And so many people say, in lieu of flowers, please donate to X. Well, make sure your charity's name is on that list. And make sure that, people who who are lawyers and accountants and people advising on bequests are aware that you are keen and willing to help and very interested in receiving legacy gifts.
Fantastic. That's super helpful. And I think the final question here is, what percentage of time should be dedicated to fundraising? Grassroots groups are inspired by their mission, can get disheartened when they have to use their time fundraising instead.
It's such a good question. Thank you for that, Jill and Moselle. There's a couple of things I would say about that. It's one of the reasons I started KEA Canada was I could see charities trying to do such important work and struggling. They were so distracted with having to figure out if they had enough money to pay the rent next month or make payroll or whatever it was they were trying to do. And so the challenge of trying to do fundraising off the corner of your desk, or it was creeping into the middle and your actual mission was creeping to the edge of your desk, is a really big problem. So I would say a couple of things. One is both things are more effective when you can keep something in the center of your plate. So it's always harder when you don't have any paid staff, because paid staff by definition have something right in the center of their plate that they're paying attention to. But if you don't have paid staff, I would suggest really customizing people's job descriptions or volunteer descriptions, because you're right, the people who really want to do the work are not necessarily the people that you want involved in fund development. So strike a committee, fundraising committee, that is just focused on raising money to support your cause. Find a way to really focus people on certain aspects of what you're trying to do. And in terms of what percent should be dedicated to fundraising, if you have an organization, I often say that for executive directors, often it's 50% of their time. Could be 30 to 50, it depends. And it depends on the structure of the organization around you. But it needs to be a significant focus. I would say 20% is the minimum.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Kathy. And thanks again for sharing all your fundraising knowledge with us today. That was so much information, and I look forward to sending out your presentation and the handouts to everyone. And so next month we're going to be, I'm just going to share my screen here. Next month we're going to be joined by Afton Brazili on June 22nd from Scribe National to learn about content strategy and writing. And on July 27th, we're joined by Jenny Spur of Perch Communications, who will share her insights on communications planning. So yeah, and please fill in the survey at the end of the webinar. We really appreciate your feedback. And thanks again, Kathy, for all your information. It was a fantastic webinar. I'm sure people got a lot of value out of it. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.